Here, please. Okay, we're on Riceville Beach, and we're talking with.
What's her name?
What's your name again?
Cut.
I forgot.
Okay, here we are in Riceville Beach, talking with Barbara Tepperman and Harriet Somberg, and we're just going to talk a little bit about your background and things you like to do. So I'd like to start by asking each of you, when you were a little girl, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh my. Do you want me to answer this first?
Yeah.
I wanted to be a great scientist and save the world. And none of that happened. I haven't saved the world, and I'm not a great scientist. Oh, I really wanted to do that, yes.
What kind of scientist did you?
I wanted to be a zoologist, and then I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I wanted to just cut things up.
How about you?
Well, are you talking about when I was very young or when I was older?
Really?
Because when I was very young, I wanted to be a mother. But I soon decided that wasn't enough. And I wanted to be a laboratory technician because that sounded great. But then I went to college and flunked freshman chemistry. Decided that was not a good idea. Then I went to Chapel Hill the last 2 years, and I became very having a social conscience, and decided that I wanted to do social work. And I followed through on that.
And you also became a mom.
Right.
Okay. What about going to school? Did you like going to school? What did you like about going to school when you were little? We're talking now. Or what did you dislike about school?
I loved school from the very day I went to it till much later.
Were you a good student?
Yes, but I worked very hard.
I loved school. From the very first day, I never did any work, but I got A's all the time until I was a freshman in college, and I got my first C on the 6-week midterm exams, and that scared me so much that I got A's after that. And I loved school so much that I kept going until last year.
What did you dislike about anything? What was your worst part of going to school? What did you like least about it?
I'm confused. I don't know whether you're talking about childhood.
We're talking about when you're young.
Childhood, because childhood is entirely different.
Well, let's talk about when you were a child.
Childhood, I have different memories than I do when I got older. Some of the things Barb said, I agreed with, but I thought you were talking about we were going to go.
Okay, well, let's talk about when you were really young, like grade school, 6th grade, something like that. Were you a good student then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I went to a very small school. There were only 30 people in the whole grade. And I was always like the very first top student in my class, which I found out later doesn't mean that it's good for what you are, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to follow through. But our school was very small and not very good. But,
did you have a favorite teacher that you remember?
well, my first grade teacher was teaching school when I finished college, and she lived across the street from me, so she was just like a friend and not just a teacher.
Remember her name?
Miss Rose. I can remember everybody in my first grade class.
All the students?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
We won't test you. How about you?
I remember my first grade teacher. Her name was Miss Diamanda, and it was her first year of teaching. And I already knew how to read, but I was so fascinated by books, and she was a very fine reading teacher, so I remember that. loved that. I hated gym.
So did I.
Because I was the littlest, and so I had to stand at the end of the line all the time and lead the line. And I never knew how to do anything like catch a ball or throw a ball. So I hated gym, and unfortunately I also hated art because I used to get, even in first grade, in kindergarten, I used to get bad grades in art. It's a terrible thing to do to a child.
Did you go to larger school then?
I don't know. I never had the feeling that I went to a larger school. I went to number 23 school across the street from my house, and I knew everybody. I have no sense of whether it was a little school or a big school. It was an ordinary city public school, and we played in the schoolyard. And I went to that school from kindergarten through 7th grade. I was really lucky that way. And then I went off to a city high school.
What was high school like?
And that was the first time I ever met other kinds of people other than people who lived in my neighborhood. I met a lot of poor people, and a few very wealthy ones, and a lot of Gentiles, and one black student.
I never met any Jews.
You never met any Jews. And there were 300 people in my high school class, most of whom I still remember. But I didn't think that that was a big class either. I don't know whether it was or not. I liked that school. It was a very ordinary public school. But nevertheless, I took Latin, and I took advanced algebra, and I took all those good things.
I'm sure I grew up earlier than Bob, because I grew up during the Depression when I was a small child. And I remember that we did without a lot of things that we now have that the school couldn't afford. And we had to buy our books. I remember that we'd go to this drugstore that sold books. And I just thought that was the most wonderful thing, to go there and buy all new books. Mother would allow us to buy new books rather than buy the ones from the people, even though it was during the Depression. She would let us buy all new books, and I just thought that was so wonderful. As soon as I got my book, I would go home and read the reader from cover to cover immediately. And the books, I could still smell those books. They just smell so wonderful.
So then you kept them?
Then I got to keep them.
Yeah.
She even let us keep them because a lot of children would sell them the next year. We got to keep ours. We thought we were hot stuff.
This was in grade school or high school?
Grade school and high school. By high school, we could rent some books, I think. But I remember as a small child buying all the books. And there were children that couldn't buy books, so a lot of them had to share books and things like that.
I don't think we ever had books of our own in school.
Oh, you don't know what you missed.
They all belonged to the class. I seem to remember. God forbid you should tear one or
Yeah, well, that's the way my children's were. They rented a book and tore it.
Yeah, I don't think. No, I would still have them if they had belonged to me, but they didn't.
What about high school? What was your high school like? What did you do in high school?
Well, our school was all one, grade 1 through 11, and we only had 11 grades. And high school was almost like an extension of, except that we changed classes instead of the teachers coming to us. We changed classes, and I thought that was a big time.
But like extracurricular activities? Did you do?
Yeah, we had. It was by then it was World War II, and so I was editor of the high school paper.
Yeah.
I mean, and the annual too. And the annual that year, they cut it out because of the war. And I had taken pictures and I had organized it and everything. And we ended up putting it in the newspaper the downtown printed the annual. So I didn't get to be much. Yes, it was.
I was in grade school during the war, and we used to do things that seemed very strange to me. First of all, for an art project, we had to make a ration book cover. And you don't know what ration books are, but you had little stamps so that you could get meat and butter on a certain allotment during the weekend. And we made these little books, covers out of burlap and some kind of embroidery or something. My mother still has them. And we collected newspapers and so forth. And the weirdest thing that we did was to collect grease, bacon grease, which I guess is used in making explosives. But first of all, we had to hide it from my grandfather because he would have hated it if he had known we ever ate bacon. And then, I don't know, we just had this jar of grease, and every once in a while somebody would come and pick it up.
One of the funniest experiences I had was that we watched for these airplanes. It was airplane watch, and you were supposed to watch the airplanes and tell them what direction it was coming from, and you called in to a central office and said 5 airplanes overhead going west. And you know my sense of direction. I often wondered if I hurt anybody in the war because I told them the wrong thing.
My father was an air raid warden. He was just slightly too old to be drafted, and also they thought he had something wrong with his lungs, but he didn't. They thought he had tuberculosis, and they rushed us all off to this clinic for tests. But since I was little, it was really, really scary. I remember that. But it turned out he didn't. However, they didn't draft him, thank goodness. And so he was an air raid warden, and I guess he went out and checked the blackouts.
My father was in the Home Guard.
What was that?
That was to protect the town in case of an invasion. We had a dam, Santee Cooper River Dam, that was generated electricity. And I remember that Sunday, December 1941, when Pearl Harbor came. That night, my father had to get his gun, put on his boots, and go down and guard the dam. And Daddy had never shot a bird, much less a person. It was really, thinking back on it, that was hilarious, that he would guard the Santee Dam. That went along for about a week, and then they cut that out. So
it was never a target, was it?
I don't think my father ever carried a gun. He wouldn't have known what to do.
Daddy didn't either. How we got into that.
That's okay. What are the memories of the war? Do you have any other?
Oh yeah, first of all, I remember the night of Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Because we were listening to the radio, because it was a Sunday night, and we used to listen to the Shadow Rolls.
Actually, it wasn't late, though. It was early, because we were coming home from the beach. And on the way, somebody told us to turn on the car. I don't think we had a radio in our car, but they told us that Pearl Harbor had occurred.
Well, maybe it happened earlier, but we heard it on Sunday night, because I remember that they interrupted the Shadow, which I think came either right before or after Jack Benny.
Yes, right.
And I remember the announcement, and of course, I recognized the president's voice, that famous voice, that very famous, and his famous voice. But I didn't really know what it meant, a day that will live in infamy, except that everybody got real quiet.
Was it scary or?
It was scary. It was very scary, but I don't, I don't remember why exactly. And I remember when my uncle went to war. First of all, we all went to say goodbye, but they wouldn't let you go down to the train tracks, I guess for security reasons. And that was very scary, and it was also the only time I ever saw my grandfather cry, his only son going off to war. And what else? It didn't affect us too much, except in some very funny ways. My sister and I were talking about this. Our milkman drove a horse because, and I didn't know why. I said to her, "We're not that old, are we?" Apparently, they were saving the gasoline for the army, and so we still remember our milkman and his horse and so forth. And the Iceman, and also something about electricity, so that we started using the icebox again instead of the refrigerator, I don't know, occasionally. And the Iceman came and would give us these little slivers of ice. I mean, it was more like the beginning of the 20th century than the middle. And then another very strange thing that happened was that we used to go ice skating in a park near our house, and they built all these barracks there, and we couldn't figure out why. And later on, much later, we discovered that it was a prisoner of war camp. They had brought Germans over.
Well, I'm a little bit older than she is, and mine was, I hate to say this, I still feel guilty about it, but I had the time of my life during the war because I didn't have any close relatives in the war, and I went to school at a time when they were training all these kids, and Chapel Hill was just full of Navy guys and Air Force guys that were training for these programs, and it was just fun. I just hate to think that that's what I look back on it as, but it was a great time to be a girl. Chapel Hill had been up until that time, there were no apartments for married couples or anything like that. It was just dorms. And suddenly it became just full of men. And at night, on Saturday nights, I remember, there would be a list of about 100 guys that had come over and signed their names because they wanted somebody to date. So it was really an exciting time for me. And I don't like to think that that's how I remember the war. But that was a large part of it. Because I didn't know my husband then. Si was in the war, but I didn't know him.
Okay, let's go back when you were younger now. We've been sort of getting ahead, but when you were a little girl, you remember a best friend that you had?
Oh yes, Alice was my dearest friend. She and I were inseparable. Huh?
What age were you then?
I met her when we were 7, and we were friends until I went off to college and she went to business school and got married. And she was adopted, and I always wanted to be adopted. I thought it was so romantic to be adopted, and I used to think, oh, if I could just be adopted.
What was appealing about being adopted?
Well, I just liked the way her parents, I loved my parents, but it just seemed that her parents were more interesting than mine at that stage of the game. And mine were working parents, and hers were hovering over her all the time or something, but we were best friends.
So you don't keep in touch with her anymore then?
Oh, I haven't talked to her for a long time because she lives far away, and you know how that is.
Yeah.
Did you have a best friend?
I had actually 2 best friends. My one friend, Ruthie Goldman, I in kindergarten. And the teachers used to get us mixed up. I don't know why. And they made me wear a red bow in my hair. And they made Ruthie wear a blue bow in her hair so they could tell us apart. I guess because we were small Jewish girls.
Did you really look alike?
I don't think so. And her parents were very very Orthodox. I think they were conservative, actually, but it seemed like Orthodox to us. And so I used to like to go over to her house on Shabbos and go through all the ceremony and so forth. And then on Saturday nights at the end of Shabbos, when we lit the Havdalah candles and did all these good routines, I thought that was great. And then my other friend, Norma, is a year older than I am, and I think that always made a big difference because it meant we weren't in the same grade in school or anything. But we were neighbor kids, and I met her when I was about 6 years old. And we were friends for forever and ever. I still remember her birthday because it's in February, the same as mine.
The reason I liked Alice, I didn't say that right before. Her parents were strict with her, and I don't know why I thought that was great. My parents went to work in the morning and left us, and her parents were strict and were there, and I just equivocated that with them being caring or something, more caring.
Your parents weren't strict then?
My parents
Or just weren't around?
My parents were strict, but they weren't home, and they didn't know what went on after they went to work. Thank goodness.
Why do you say that?
Because we had nanas that took care of us, and we just did what we wanted to do. And Mother came home at the end of the day thinking everything was perfect, and we just changed back into these perfect little kids that she thought we were. But while she was gone, we were into everything. And I was really lucky because we lived in this small town where you were completely free. There were woods behind our house and trees to climb and picnics and gangs of neighborhood children that played together. And we really just ran our own lives while they were away. And then Mother and Dad would come home at the end of the day, and we would spend the evening with them. But it was, like I say, it was during the Depression, so they had to work really hard.
Were your parents strict?
I guess my father was very strict. I don't think my mother was very strict, but I'm not even sure if she was home or not. She has built up this mythology about my father and how he supported the family and everything. But I think that really my mother worked almost all the time. And my Aunt Connie lived with us. And when we moved to Rochester, my Aunt Connie lived with us. And so she was sort of like my mother, and God knew she wasn't strict. She taught me how to read, and she just taught me everything. Sang me social significance lullabies about labor unions and so forth. My father, I never saw when I was little because he worked such long hours. And when he came home, he would fall asleep. But he was very strict about things like eating your vegetables and not spilling your milk and stuff like that.
Well, my mother was strict when she was, she laid the law down before she went. And my father was just sweet and dear. And Mother was the one that made all the rules, and her mother was very Victorian. That was they came from England, and she was brought up by this strict mother, and she had some of the same ideas, but she was not able to follow through as well as her mother had. So, but my father never corrected us, or he was just dear.
Well, my mother was a lot like me, I think. She's the oldest one in the family, and her mother worked all the time. They had a chicken and egg business. And so my mother was not domestic at all. She didn't know anything about babies. She didn't know how to cook. She didn't know how to sew, even though she had 4 younger siblings. And so I was just like that. I still am.
My mother ran a business and did an excellent job. I mean, she had a department store and she bought all the departments. She had women's clothes and gifts and children's clothes and a lot of responsibility. And I've got a letter from my father that he wrote me when I was in college, and he said that Mother was, I gave you a lot of love and Mother did too, but Mother was the one that pulled me through, or something like that.
Yeah, that's nice. Before I was born, I think my parents really had a good time. It was during the Depression, but they lived in New York and they both had jobs. And they both worked at Bloomingdale's, and my mother said that if you had a job in those days, life was good. Everything was so cheap. And so they went out to restaurants, and they saw everything in New York City, and they really had a good time. And my mother used to work at she worked at the toy counter, and she also worked at the cosmetic counter. And so she knows everything about cosmetics. And she said when she worked at the toy counter, she waited on Eleanor Roosevelt one day.
I shook her hand.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
So exciting. And then there's my baby picture. My birth announcement is in the Bloomingdale newspaper.
Now, both of you have younger sisters. How did you get along with your sisters?
Do I really have to answer this? Everyone knows how awful I was to my sister. Oh God, from the day she was born, I remember it. I was almost 5 years old, and my Aunt Connie took me. And you know, in those days, they didn't let children go into the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to stand outside, and it was in December, so it was freezing cold. And there was my mother up there looking out the window with some strange infant child. I really did not like my sister, and everybody oohed and ahed over her. She was adorable.
Oh, that's very similar to mine.
With the curly hair and everything. And when I went off to school, she thought I was wonderful, and she tried to follow me to school.
God, that's exactly
And
what
I let her do it. I was hoping she'd get hit by a truck. I was terrible. And my sister, and then she grew up to be such a wonderful person.
When did you start appreciating her?
Oh, it wasn't until long after I left home
Is that
and
right?
grew up. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Well, I had a very similar experience because my sister and I realized that we really didn't really like each other until we got married. And now we're so close that it's amazing. We think she can call me up and ask me a question that I was getting ready to call her. I mean, we just in sync now, but when she was a little girl, I was terrible to her. She was pretty and I was fat. And I just company would come over. I took elocution lessons and I would learn all these poems and they would want me to recite, but what they couldn't wait for was for me to get through because she ate everything I did. And they couldn't wait for me to get through so she could stand up and say it. And I would think to myself, just wait till they get home and get you. And I did. As soon as they left, she paid. but we didn't. And then when I got to be a teenager, and she was 3 years younger than me. I got to be a teenager. I really began to like her, but then she didn't want to have anything to do with me. So we really never got together until I got married and she got married. We became good friends. Now
You're
we're
both mean to your sister.
Yeah, and my sister had a terrible time in school because she had the same teachers I had, and I was very good academically, and she wasn't. And so that was a terrible burden for her, and also very unfair. Followed her around
Yeah.
a long time.
Mother used to, I think Mother started some of that by making me responsible for her.
Yeah.
I remember once we went to Wilmington on the bus, and that was a big deal for us. And my sister wanted to go, but she always got nauseated as soon as she left the house. And we got on the bus, and about 5 miles out of town, she said, "Harriet, I feel nauseated." And embarrassed, I had to go up to the front and tell the bus driver this. And he stopped the bus, and she got off and got back on, and 10 miles down the road, "Harriet, I feel nauseated again." So I go up to the bus driver, and he stops again. The third time he said, "Tell your sister to open the window and lean her head out the window till we get to Florence." Oh, that was awful.
I used to have to take my sister to the bathroom all the time. And I was telling somebody this story the other day about the sanitized, they had these sanitized toilets at a Chinese restaurant, Lynn Farr's in Rochester. And I must have been, maybe 8 years old. And so she was 3 years old. I was pretty little. And my mother said, "Take Debbie to the bathroom, Betsy." So it was the bathroom was downstairs. And we go inside, and there is this toilet with this shining blue light. It was some kind of ultraviolet sanitation, I guess. And we were scared out of our wits. I mean, I still remember the sensation that a small child would have, and you see this glowing blue toilet seat. And we went racing upstairs. "Mommy, Mommy, you have to come with us." And she did.
Well, I remember as our childhood, Wrightsville Beach was just heaven on earth. We just couldn't wait for the summers to come so we could come down here. And it was just like it was tonight, cousins by the dozens, and we just roamed. In those days, you could just roam the beach without any fears whatsoever. Children played out, and we just, it was wonderful.
So you'd spend the summer?
Well, not all the summers, just about maybe a week, and then we'd come back. Everybody's rented a room from Aunt Clara once in a while. So when you could get, that room was available, you could rent that room out.
Where'd you spend your summers?
We spent a lot of our summers at my grandpa and grandma's. And, oh God, that was wonderful. I would have loved to have done that for the rest of my life. My grandpa used to take me with him out to the pasture.
It was a farm, and we had a farm.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we have pictures of Debbie and me wearing his boots. Because there was a lot of mud and cow pats and things in the pasture. And he used to take me with him to go look at the cattle. And then my grandma took me with her to go and collect the chickens and eggs. They weren't exactly farmers, they were sort of jobbers, brokers. And one time we were riding in the truck, my grandma used to drive this truck. I don't think she ever had a license, but down the dirt road with a hired man and me. And we must have struck a nest of wasps or bees or something. And they all came flying in through the window. Everybody got stung except me. I didn't get stung, but it was very traumatic and for everybody, as you can imagine, lots of excitement and goings on. just had the best time. And my grandfather had a pasture, which I understand is now got condos on it, that had huckleberries in it, and milkweed, and wild onions, and grapes, and God, we used to have a wonderful time
I spent a week every summer on a farm too. My best friend's grandmother lived on a farm, and five of us would go down there in the summertime and spend a week. And really, it was real farm life. I mean, we learned how to milk a cow, and I remember one summer we went down there and we'd forgotten to take bathing suits, and they had this big horse trough, and she gave us old sheets, and we all designed bathing suits and had a contest. And we used to swim in this big horse trough. It was a huge barrel, and I guess it was nothing really, but it seemed like fun to us. And then we would jump from the biggest, scariest thing was to jump from the barn down into this huge haystack. That was really dangerous and fun.
The other half of what I used to do, there was hide in the coat closet, because the kitchen, I mean, this house must have really been a mess, but for a kid it was great. There was the end of the closet backed up to the refrigerator, which was in the kitchen, of course, but there wasn't a complete wall. There was a space. So you could hide in the closet and listen to all the aunts and grandmother talking about, what was going on in their lives. And the other part was I read all my uncle's books, my uncle's and my aunt's books. I'm not in the bookcase, in the living room. All of Dickens and all, Tom Swift and stuff.
There were, in places like that, there were books that you didn't read again until you came back to that place. Did you find that? Like,
oh, yeah.
I remember I had an aunt, and she had certain books, and I would read those books when I went to see her, and then maybe 3 years later I would go back, and it was like old friends, reading those same books again.
You told us something about the towns you lived in. Tell us more about what it was like growing up in the towns where you lived.
Well, Harriet, why don't you go ahead? I think my town was very nondescript, so you start.
Well, mine was a very small southern town.
This was Manning.
Manning, South Carolina. It was a population about 1,500. And everybody knew everybody else. And I think there were only like two or maybe three Jewish families there. And I have some very bad memories about a cross being burned on our front lawn. That's how archaic it was or something. And looking back on it now, I see how much prejudice and all there was there. The blacks lived on the edge of town in these horrible shanties, and the poorer whites lived farther in. It was a very class-conscious place, and if you didn't live there or you weren't born there, or you really had a hard time being accepted. New people that came into town were really I remember when I got married, I said I would never marry anybody that lived in a small southern town because I never want my children to grow up prejudiced. And like they were there, it always worried me but it was a very secure place, and I was totally accepted there myself. My parents, they made a point. I often think about what they did to preserve this acceptability, I guess you would call it. I mean, for instance, on Sundays, Mother and Daddy would not let us do things like play outside because it would offend our neighbors. And we couldn't mow the lawn or hang clothes up or do anything that might offend our neighbors. And, you know, I guess I'm looking back on it rather than the way it was then. I probably accepted it as okay then because that's all I knew.
Yeah.
But,
So how did you keep from getting consumed by the attitudes of the town, the prejudice
well,
and everything?
I don't know. I always thought that my parents I always learned to love the nurses or the nanas that took care of us. And I always cringed when my parents really were good people, but they were like everybody else there. They just sort of accepted the fact that that was the way you treated black people. And I guess for a while I thought it was the way life was. It wasn't until I went away from there and understood more that I realized how it was. But it was a very nice place to live, safe and comfortable, and I had no troubles with being accepted, even though we were in the minority, certainly in the minority.
Because you were Jewish?
Yeah, my parents really tried hard to be a part of the community, and the other family that lived there that were Jewish were never really accepted because they just were too, I guess, quote, different. And they would have been so much happier if they could have picked themselves up and gone somewhere else.
Did you go to temple or Sunday school?
Yes, we went to this nearby town to Sunday school. And as I was telling you earlier this morning, I used to think that was so unfair that we had to get up on Sunday morning and go to Sunday school, and our parents got to sleep. And they never went, and I couldn't understand why the children had to be responsible for the religion in the family. My parents went on the holy days. It was a long trip, so we really wasn't like having a temple in the town. But my mother let us go to any church we wanted to in between. I remember I used to love going to the Presbyterian church because they had what they call Christian Endeavor on Sunday night, and that's where all the girls and boys came. So I used to hightail it there every Sunday night. It wasn't really to receive much religion, but a good way to be a part of the group. But I felt very accepted then. I was certainly on the top of everything. I mean, I was like voted the most likely to succeed when I graduated college. I mean, high school and stuff like that. So our family was really okay.
So you grew up in Rochester, right?
Yeah, I was born in New York City, in Flushing, New York. And then I guess what happened, to this day I really don't have it straight, but I think eventually my father lost his job. And so and then my mother got pregnant with my sister. And so we had to move back to Rochester where they knew they would never go hungry because my grandparents were farmers. And so we lived in a house right across the street from the grammar school. Certainly didn't know anybody outside the neighborhood. I don't remember any special Jewish, quick Christian segregation, although I did go to Sunday school. And of course, there were all Jewish children there. But I went from kindergarten through 12th grade with a lot of the same kids. And we didn't move to a nicer house until I must have been 13. And of course, I carried on like I was moving to the moon, and it was just 4 miles away. But I was very lucky. I got to go to one grammar school and one high school. And my sister had to change grammar schools. That was kind of hard for her. But we always, I had these same friends, and they lived nearby, and on summer nights we played capture the flag in 90-degree weather and you know, never noticed, never thought anything of it.
We didn't have air conditioning.
And we, the kinds of games we played were, you know, we biked, we roller skated, we jumped rope, and we played games with chalk, like
Hopscotch.
hopscotch, yeah, and stuff like that. And those were the things we really did. And my friends were all neighborhood kids. I can't even imagine what it would have been like if we had had to be bused somewhere.
That's the way ours were, all neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, Nina's father lived on Westminster Road, and I lived on Edgerton Street, and that was 3 blocks away. I didn't know him then, but you know, he did go. I met him in high school. And we lived, it turned out that we lived on the southeast side of the city, which was a perfectly good place to live. Kind of lower middle class, maybe. But I never knew we were poor. I do remember that it was very, very exciting whenever we got a new car. Which it was like a big occasion. It only happened maybe twice. I mean, usually Daddy didn't have a car. The town itself, I would say, was pretty nondescript for children growing up. My parents sent me to the Eastman School of Music to take piano lessons, and that is for very, very serious musicians. I shouldn't have done it.
How long did you take lessons?
I don't know, forever. I think I took them for about 5 or 6 years, and I got up to the 3rd grade, and I never graduated beyond that because I had to play my recitals in Kilburn Hall, which was like a professional theater, in front of Howard Hanson, whom you may or may not have heard of, who is a very well-known contemporary composer. You just can't even imagine making children play their recitals in front of me.
So were you good?
I was terrible. I was terrible pianist. I was in the Brownies and the Girl Scouts, but all of these things were neighborhood kinds of things. I don't really know anything about Rochester. Every once in a while we would, when we were a little older, we would get on the bus and we would travel for an hour to the beach. But that was it. And we were pretty contented to be near home, I guess, for some time. I went to camp and things when I got older.
Okay, Harriet and Barb, part 2.
Okay, last time we talked about a lot about when you were younger, and so now we want to just, talk some more about what it was like in the later years, let's say.
I don't know.
But,
ask me later.
But let's just start with when you got married and all that time. So, how did each of you meet Kara's grandfather? Mom?
Well, I met Nina's father, Kara's grandfather, in high school. We only lived a few blocks away from each other, and I think our parents knew each other. Although the Bowrods traveled in very highly cultured circles, and my parents traveled in semi-cultured circles. So he used to play, and during the summer, John used to play in the schoolyard. We used to play baseball and capture the flag, and I think that's how I met him.
How old were?
And I was 13 years old and he was 15 years
Gosh.
old. I've known him for a long time.
Wow.
Yes.
That is a long time.
Yeah.
How did you meet Si? Harriet?
Well, I came home on vacation, and my parents lived about 25 miles from this town of Kingstree, South Carolina, and my aunt lived there, and she was, what's the word for matchmaker? Anyway, she was always fixing up the nieces and nephews, and some of them that I had met through her were really jerks. And so this particular night, I was dating a doctor in Pittsburgh, and I really couldn't care less about going. But my mother, she called up and said she had this nice guy she wanted me to meet, and would I please come over and have dinner with her, and she would have him over and introduce him. And so I told my mother, I said, I'm just not going to another time when she fixes me up, because the last one was simply terrible. And Mother said, you have to, because you haven't seen Aunt Sadie this summer. So I went, and Si was there, and I just liked him from the very minute I met him. But I acted like I didn't. And he said afterwards that he wasn't thinking of asking me out again because I told so many lies that evening. He kept telling me about all these things he had done. And I said, oh, I did that, and I did that. And he caught me several times. I couldn't have done it. And so anyway, at the last minute, he decided to ask me out.
What did you like so much about him when you met him? Do you remember?
He was funny and smart. And he was short, and I had always said I was never going to date anybody that was short. And he was shorter than I was, actually, because I had on heels. He was about 5'4". And I remember the second time I dated him, I wore flats because I thought he would like, me being in heels. In those days when you got dressed up, you wore heels. And he came over to pick me up in Manning, and he said, why are you wearing those flats? And I said, well, I just thought you would feel more comfortable. He said, go put your heels on. I think you look damn good in those. And so he was just, I never, after that, it didn't occur to me that he was short. He was just...
So did you date a long time?
We dated every available minute there was in vacation ended, and then I went to Pittsburgh to graduate school, and he came up for Thanksgiving and brought me a ring, and I really didn't want to get married because I wanted to finish school, but he said that he was going to ask me one more time, and if I didn't say yes, and I guess I just said yes, and so I finished out the year, and then we got married.
Did you want to get married when you got married?
Me?
Yes.
No, I never wanted to get married, but I didn't really know what girls did when they grew up. I never really knew about that. I was 17 years old when I graduated from high school and left home and went to college, and I was really much too young to go to college. I was just having a good time. I met a boy at college that I liked a lot, but I had really been dating John forever, and he was at Wisconsin, and he was graduating and going to Michigan to medical school. He really wanted me to marry him, and that's what everybody was doing. So I did it too.
That's sort of the way I felt, that my parents wanted me to, felt very happy and comfortable about me getting married, but really and truly deep down I kept knowing that I really shouldn't be doing this. I should finish school, but I guess in those days there was a lot of pressure on you.
I didn't finish school either, yeah. Not then. Later I did.
Does anything really funny or unusual or special stand out about your wedding for either of you?
All I remember is that Uncle Sidney was late. And I was so nervous. And I kept, since the wedding was at my mother and father's house, I was upstairs, and I kept looking out the window, and he was so late. And to this day, I still remember that because it was traumatic.
Mine too. My mother, the wedding was 19 miles away from in another town because we didn't have a temple in the town we lived in. So the wedding was in a place where we went to Sunday school and confirmed and all. And mother sent cars with people in it, and she put my mother-in-law in a car with somebody that did not know how to get there. And so they went to like 40 miles out of the way, and the rabbi kept saying, "We've got to start this wedding, we've got to start this wedding." My husband said over my dead body, "I will not start this wedding until my mother gets there." So they finally showed up, but they played the same song over and over again for at least 30 or 40 minutes extra.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the rabbi was there, of course. Everybody was there except Uncle Sid, but he came.
Did you wait for him?
Yeah. He's my mother's only brother and my only blood uncle, so we had to wait.
We had to wait for my mother-in-law. I probably sort of thought we should start, but I didn't think we should, so.
Probably was a good decision.
Yes, I think so.
Well, since we're making this for everybody, but really so Kara can share all of your memories, we would like you to say, especially what you remember about Ben or Nina's birth, whichever is appropriate. You could talk about your other children too.
Okay. I don't remember Ben's birth at all.
You missed a great deal.
Oh, but I do remember Nina's. First of all, Nina was born in Philadelphia at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. And so we had to come from Phoenixville to Philadelphia, which was a fair distance. I don't remember how much, but maybe 45 minutes or something, which is a lot when you're in labor. And we had to put everyone else in the car, of course, all the 3 other babies in the car. And since I never had very long labors, we were concerned about getting there on time. But as soon as we got there, the labor stopped. And then it started again, and she was born fairly soon. And I think I was awake during the whole time.
Was that different from your other experience?
No, but Danny and Amy were born very, very quickly. And for Bruce, I was knocked out because that was an old-fashioned doctor. Nina was born, as everybody knows, in 1962, which was a year when there were a lot of very terrible birth defects from drugs that mothers had been taking, particularly in Europe.
Oh, right. Was that when it was?
It was, yeah, so when we saw Nina, we saw these big brown eyes, and we saw these arms and these legs. And not much hair, but a little bit of dark hair. And Nina looked sort of like a little tiny Raggedy Ann. She wasn't a classically beautiful baby, but boy, those eyes, I could always see those big eyes. And she also looked sort of like a little, like a little gingerbread boy, where you see these big eyes. and a little face. And she was very small, but she was a good and lively baby, and also she was a lot of fun. I didn't have time with the other babies to have fun with them, but I had fun with her.
Well, let's see, Ben was born on the 2nd of January, and my doctor and my husband had tickets to the Orange Bowl game. And they were very anxious to go, and I was very anxious they did not go. And I hoped that they both agreed to stay, even though Ben wasn't expected for like another week to 10 days after the Orange Bowl game. But I put up such a fight that they both decided to forego going, and I just prayed that Ben would come before, so that they wouldn't feel like they'd done this for nothing. And sure enough, he came the second at 1 a.m. So I didn't feel so bad.
Did he have red hair when he came out?
And he had a little piece of red hair. And I remember when they brought him in, I never thought of having a red-headed baby for some reason, because Debbie was so dark, and we're dark. And he had blue eyes, and bluish eyes, and I said, "Are you sure you have the right baby?" She showed me the tag, and so I kept him. He was just the sweetest, my prettiest baby of all. He just, of all four of them, I guess he was the prettiest baby. Yeah, just a joy. The only thing was, he didn't talk early. I've told this story so many times, but he didn't say anything, and it worried me. I was going to have a psychologist come in and examine him by the time he was almost 2. He wasn't, I mean, it wasn't that he wasn't just not saying, you know, he didn't say mama, dada, anything like that. He didn't say anything. He would just go, And I began to get very concerned about it. And one day I was mopping up the kitchen floor, and he toddled in. He was not quite 2. And he said, "What you doing?" And I turned around, I said, "You can talk." And after that, it seemed like he just spoke in sentences. He just never said one-word things.
What was he like when he was little? When he was still little, but a little bit older than 2?
Well, he had a sister that was very bossy. And he adored her, but she really did boss him around a lot. And they played well together, though, but on her terms when he was little. And we lived near my mother and father, and they had a great life with them. We had we visited them every summer, and so the children got to see a lot of them, and their other grandparents too.
What was Nina like when she was
What was Nina
little?
like? She was very independent. She wouldn't eat regular baby food. She would only eat something that had some good taste to it, like spaghetti or chili. She was so tiny. She weighed 16 pounds when she was a year old. She's perfectly healthy and everything. She was just tiny. But also very independent and not exactly precocious, but very advanced, which I guess is another way of saying precocious.
A mother's way of saying it.
And so everything she did, it looked like she couldn't possibly do it because she was too little. And when she was a little older than a toddler, they would never give her menus in restaurants because they didn't think she was old enough to read. And I think that annoyed her no end. But we had a good time. Her brothers, I think, treated her a lot better than they treated her older sister. And there was enough enough space in there where Nina and I could spend some time together. And when she was 3 years old, we used to take the bus and go off to school together. And the only thing she really was angry about was that she didn't like her babysitter, who gave her butter and jelly sandwiches. I didn't think that was the end of the world, but she thought it was pretty awful.
How did all of the kids interact when they were little? You know, when they were 9 or 10, all of that.
You mean my 3?
Yeah, well,
Because Stephen was not anywhere in sight.
Yeah.
Sandy was sort of caught between the two of them. And I remember when she was young, she would side. One of them would say, "Sandy, you're on my side. We don't like the other one." And she would agree, and so she would go on the side. And then the older two would make up, and then they'd say, "Sandy, go play somewhere else." And Sandy always felt like she was left out of the whole situation. But they got along, they took care of each other, and there was always some rivalry, but they got along pretty good, I guess.
I don't know. I think the boys were pretty mean to the girls, but I didn't know this till last year or in the very recent past. And used to really do mean things and so forth. But I didn't know it, and I thought they all got along very well, for the most part.
Well, mine were girls, so they all had their different interests, and they didn't play together as much as they probably would if they'd been the two older had been boys or vice versa. But I wish I could ask the cameraman what he thinks about this.
That's a whole nother story.
Maybe we'll do the cameraman story some other time.
Yeah.
This is just your memories, which may or may not.
I thought my children were
The
fun, and I must say I adored being a mother and taking care of them and doing things with them, and I just went through all the Cubs. I was always the Brownie leader, the Cub Scout leader, the this leader, the that leader, and I just really enjoyed my children's childhood a lot. And I guess that's my one passion of children. I've always loved children, and I'm happiest really when I'm with children, as you all can tell.
Yes.
Did you work when your children were small?
I didn't have a paying job, no, but I went to school. As a matter of fact, I started going back to school, and then I got pregnant with you, and it was a very difficult pregnancy, and so I had to quit. But I did take a couple of courses at the University of Pennsylvania, and that got me very, very interested in English. So it was a good beginning.
Yeah.
I started teaching preschool when Sandy was about 8 months old, and I found out that that's what I should have been doing instead of social work, because in social work I was sort of a flop because I could never close the door and leave and come home and shut that part of my life out. And with children, it was very difficult to do that, so I gave that up and started teaching preschool. And we moved around so much. We lived in 12 places when my children were growing up. So I never got to, I really wanted to go back to school and get a degree in early childhood education, but we moved so much that I could never really, so I just took courses here, there, and yon. And one of the most interesting things I did was when we lived in Peru, there's Peace Corps boys, and I started this nursery school in the Barriadas, and that was really.
What is that?
That's where the poor people live in the city, and was really interesting. And I've taught Head Start, and I've taught in private schools, and I started a cooperative school in the university in Nacogdoches, Texas, where we put it in a housing development, and we took half the children from the college area and half the children from the housing project, and the parents had to give time, quality time in the school. And so it was a really good experience for both groups, learning to interact and get along together.
Did that work?
Yes, it worked better than Sandy's here in Knoxville with all. We didn't have any of the big problems that she has. It worked beautifully.
Great.
My best friend and I did that for a couple of years, and then it became federally funded. I left, but it was federally funded after that, and we grew into a big thing. I'm sure it was
a great idea.
Yeah.
We did that, but it was my mother's doing. That was when I was a child, so we're backing up sort of. But my mother worked at a settlement house. I don't know what you would call those now, but settlement house is really where social work, practical social work started. And so there were all these poor kids there, and my mother used to take me along, and we used to put on plays. And so I met all these, and I was about 11, so we had a lot of fun singing and acting and getting all these kids off the streets in the inner city.
That was great.
Yeah, we had a very good time. But as a mother, I didn't do anything like that. I don't think I was a flop, but I told my son I would never be a Cub Scout leader no matter what he did to me. And he didn't care. He must have.
I think that's why when I adopted Stephen and found out he was going to be a boy, I thought, oh no, I got to go through Cub Scouts again. Because they used to stay at my house. I mean, after the meeting was over, the parents must have thought it was camp because they never picked him up.
Yeah. Well, actually, I don't know. I think I did all right considering that I didn't know how to cook, I didn't know how to sew, I had never written a check, and I knew nothing about babies, and I didn't even want to bring my Bruce home from the hospital because I didn't have that instant maternal feeling that they said you were supposed to have. I was just way too tired.
Well, you were too young.
Too young and too tired.
How old were you when you had Bruce?
20. And then I started to like him, and I've liked you all since then.
That's good to know.
Yeah, but I never did. If anybody brings me little milk cartons to make into something, I just go into shock. I don't do that kind of thing.
How old were you when you had Deb?
23.
That's young too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that was the age when people got married and had children. I think some of my relatives were already worried that I was going to get married.
Wow.
But Cy was much older than me.
How much
The
older?
same as you, I guess. About 9 years.
No,
So,
John was just 2 years old.
oh, I thought he was. Cy was at Duke when I was at Chapel Hill, but I didn't know he was getting his master's. He had just gotten out of the Army. And I didn't know him then. So I'm kind of glad because it wouldn't have been as much fun if I had met him then, I don't think.
How did Ben get along with Cy when they were young?
Oh my.
When Ben was young.
They had their ups and downs, I think. Cy was, he was a good father, but he was short on patience, and he was always so busy. And he traveled a lot because he was a forester, and he had big tracts of timber that he had to cruise and things like that. So he was gone an awful lot of the time. But he did encourage the children. One of the big things he did was encourage them to be independent, which I wasn't so. I was too careful and too worried, and he made them do things like go home from Peru by themselves to the States and things like that.
Thing.
Yeah. And he was not he's not here to defend himself, but he was not an easy person to know, because he, I don't know, he just wasn't. He was a very interesting person, but I'm sure the children would say that he was difficult at times.
Most
He
interesting
loved them
people.
very
Yes,
much,
they
but I wish Ben could enter into this.
He will, so.
I remember the time I made Bruce take the bus home to and from nursery school when he was 4 years old.
That's the kind of thing my husband did.
I
would
really had
stand
no
there
choice
cringing.
because I had 2 infants and I couldn't help him, but still, it was pretty sad now that I think back. He did all right except one day.
4 years old. But
All of a sudden I hear this honking, and the bus has pulled up our street because he forgot where he was supposed to get off. And so the driver, took him around a few more stops and then realized he had this baby on the bus. And so brought him to the door. It was very hard.
well, I guess you felt you wanted them to be as independent as you were when you were.
I wanted him to be independent, but if I could have physically taken him to nursery school, I would have.
Yeah, it must have been hard.
It was very hard,
Yeah, Ben was put on. Ben was about 3.5. We were living in Miami because we had lost the shirt on our backs. My husband had some unfortunate business reverses, and we moved to Miami because he was going to do some land deals or something down in the Everglades, and so we lived with my mother-in-law until we could get a house. And I was pregnant with Sandy and feeling just awful, and being in the same house, crowded into this house, and I just said, Ben's got to go. And so I got a good nursery school, and he did not want to go. And I remember the first morning I took him out to the car and put him in, and I don't know how I could have done that, because I always felt guilty about that maybe that probably had something to do with his personality. But he went off to nursery school. Of course, about a week he was going fine, but I too remember putting him down and saying, goodbye, I gotta go throw up.
That's okay. I think they turned out fine, these experiences.
Guess it's not all roses being a mother.
No, it's not, but it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe I can ask you some questions now, more about some recent happenings. Maybe. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to go to Ben and Nina's wedding? What that whole experience was like?
I thought it was wonderful. I had such a good time. I just thought it was wonderful and beautiful, and I was just so happy. I was a little bit unsure about whether you like me or not at that point, Nina, because we didn't know each other very well.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was beautiful, and I just love meeting your family, and everybody was so friendly and all. It's the only wedding I've ever been to that we were outnumbered completely, though, as you can see why now.
Yes.
Well, if you don't have your wedding in Wilmington.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, it happened that it was the same day as my sister's son. Otherwise, probably all of them would have come. But how can you not go to the wedding that's in the same town?
Right.
I'm sure that a lot of them would have been there, because they all said that, why did we have to have them on the same day? So it turned out that was the only one way that either one of you could have the only day that was suitable. So.
Yeah.
But
I thought it was a wonderful wedding. We really had a good time, and it was a wonderful family reunion. But I have very strong feelings about weddings, and they're not 100% positive. I mean, if we're telling the truth, I didn't want to lose my daughter, Nina.
You weren't losing a daughter, you were gaining a son.
you don't
That's
look at it like that at the
true.
time,
That's
though.
true, but there are very mixed blessings about weddings.
Yeah. And gaining a Kara. Eventually.
Getting care.
We
Yes.
weren't thinking about that particularly.
No, no. But it was a great wedding. It was a lot of fun. You must have all kinds of videotapes. And it's a lot of fun to meet Ben's family. And of course, I already knew Ben because we had been to Red Sox games and things before.
Well, that's right. You knew that.
That's right.
Yeah, so
But
that
I
I was
just met
comfortable
Nina
with
one
him.
other time. Being shy, I don't always open up to people as quick as I meet them, you know. And so I didn't know how she felt about me, and I wasn't. I mean, I knew I loved her, but I didn't know much of. I felt a little bit uncomfortable. That's not unusual, I don't think. I'm telling it like it is.
Well, I can just make an editorial comment here. That I think I was worried that you wouldn't like me. more than
Probably,
anything
I
else.
know. That's the way. That's what Tony said. I mean, this is not just with you. I mean, gosh, when I met Tony, Tony is Deborah's husband. Whoever.
Uncle Tony.
Uncle Tony.
Right. Oh, Uncle Tony.
First, he talked incessantly the whole time he was there. You know how he talks. Well, he was nervous, so he didn't shut up. He was there a weekend, and we kept going out of the room thinking, does he ever shut up? Does he ever shut up? Sandy was there, and he told one joke right after the other, half of which I didn't get, and I was so tired of laughing without knowing what he was saying. Well, that's another story.
He was probably a little nervous.
Oh, he was,
Yes.
and he said the same thing you did, that he didn't know whether I liked him or not.
Well, how about, what do you remember about what it was like to become a grandmother for the first time?
Oh God, that was so exciting. That was when Sammy was born, of course, and it was almost exactly 7 years ago. And Danny and Lori were married on August the 18th of 1 year, and then they came to my sister's house for Thanksgiving, and they got pregnant, and Sam was born the next year. So my only misgiving was that they hadn't had much time together, but that your first grandchild is a little bit like your first child, you know. That is really something special.
It's just like I told Nathan the other day when he said to me, you're just acting like a regular person while on this vacation. And he meant that I was so busy with everybody else. And I told him that he was not a regular person, that he was my special child, and I loved everybody, but he was just very, very special and will always be. And that's true. Your first grandchild is just, it's not that you don't love them all. I adore all of them, but it's just something so new and special about the first one.
Then I immediately rushed off to, this first time I ever did this in my life, I went to Elizabeth Arden, spent in the beauty thing called the Red Door, because I said, oh my God, I'm a grandmother, I have to do something.
That's great.
Gosh, Barbara, you look so young, you shouldn't have to worry about it.
Oh. Yeah, but this is all very psychological.
Well, what do you remember about the day Kara was born?
Oh, that was a whole nother story, especially because of all the preceding events.
Such as?
I mean, all the difficult pregnancies and so forth.
Oh.
But
that's me too. I breathed a sigh of relief.
Yeah. There's
Ben
something.
told me she had 10 toes and 10 fingers.
Yes.
And everything was okay.
That's true, except again, you know, it's very different when your daughter is pregnant and has a baby than when your son's wife is pregnant and has a baby. So I was pretty concerned the whole time, I must say. But I was thrilled too.
Well, I mean, see, I was so excited when she was a girl that I wanted a granddaughter.
Yeah.
So I can always tell Kara that she was my first granddaughter, and they are special, so I don't have to discriminate there because I was just so excited about her. And Ben said she had red hair and stuff, and then I was worried about you because he said you weren't doing too well, and labor hadn't been the easiest, and then when he said you were having trouble with your leg and all, I really was worried.
But she's worth it too. So.
Oh, she is.
Yeah. Well, this next question is really maybe a little bit difficult to come up with something. So take your time, think about it, and
I love the way she gives us a warning.
just think about whatever you feel comes into your head. We wanted you to tell us something about the things you believe in or the values that are important to you. And I know that's a really broad question.
It sounds like we're vying for Miss America.
It does, doesn't it?
I believe in etiquette.
Just what are you would you feel strong about? And what defines you? What would get you really get you angry if you heard about something, or what you would take the flag up for, or something of that sort?
Well, my thing that really gets my dander up is prejudice and injustice and people being treated unfairly. And that's what I really cared that my children got. That's why I told you that time that I did not want them to grow up in a small town like I did, because I didn't want them to have those prejudices that I see in so many people in the same situations. But I hate injustice. And I don't like people that lie. or make promises that they can't keep. I just can't stand to be disappointed.
I better write these
So
down.
if you tell me something and you don't do it, I mean, not if you can't help it, but if you just make these rash promises and then don't live up to them. I can't take disappointment very well.
I understand that.
I think it's particularly true that your parents should tell you the truth. Maybe not
Yes,
all the bleak things of the world, but
that's what
they
I
should
mean,
tell
too.
you what to expect when you grow up and what life is like and what will happen, how your values will be affected if you have Richard Nixon for president. I blame everything on Richard Nixon because I never knew what to tell my children after that. I never knew what to tell them about kindness, justice, peace, truth, treating everyone equally, and honesty, of course. And when I grew up, when I was little, Franklin Roosevelt was president. And Joe Louis was the heavyweight champion. And I thought those two things would always be. And those were, I feel very, very strongly that children don't seem to have heroes anymore. And I feel that they should, maybe they can find them in books. I feel very strongly everybody should learn how to read. And that you should be kind to one another. Life is tough enough.
Well, I remember the day that John Kennedy died, and my children were in school, and they were coming home, and I thought, when they get here, I've got to have an explanation to tell them why he got killed, or something that will make sense to them. And there just wasn't an explanation. They just had to learn that there was evil in this world, and that he was the victim. I was trying so hard to think of another way to explain it, to make it easier for them, but there just wasn't. I mean, I was so brokenhearted myself. I just figured they're just gonna have to accept the fact that there's bad people in this world.
They did, yeah, I found it very hard to teach them about bad people. But they managed to learn, unfortunately, very early. There was a little boy who killed their pet turtle by smashing it with a rock. There were children who took the quarters out of Bruce's hand the first time he ever went somewhere by himself with some quarters in his hand. And so by the time Kennedy was killed, they had already learned a few small things.
Well, mine had too, but I mean, this to us was just so momentous.
It was momentous. Nina was an infant. She doesn't remember. Fortunately. Yeah.
So, what about you both mentioned Kennedy. I know that you both admired him greatly. Who were some other people, either the past or the present?
Stevenson was my champion.
He was my hero.
I love that man. Oh.
Adlai Stevens?
Yes,
Why?
I just thought he would have been the best president, and that the world would have been so different if he could have been president. But
He was the first. I was old enough to vote in, must have been 1956. So he was the first person I ever voted for.
That's exciting.
I voted for Roosevelt once.
Is there anybody else that you really stands out as a great hero of yours?
I thought Eleanor Roosevelt was a fantastic woman too.
Yeah.
And
You had some great role models.
Yeah. I was pretty partial to King Arthur myself. I loved it.
oh, I thought you meant that were living at the time.
Yeah, I loved mythological heroes. I love King Arthur and Robin Hood. I always wanted to be a boy.
Well, I want to be Emily Dickinson, but there doesn't seem to be much of a chance that I'm going to be there. I stay at home alone and look out my window a lot, but I can't write beautiful poetry.
No.
I've read everything that's printed almost on her. I just think she's a great poet.
I love Virginia Woolf and Isaac Dynaston, not necessarily as people, but I love their writing. I don't think you have to love them as people. James Baldwin's literature was something wonderful, I thought.
I just read a new book about Elizabeth Bishop's poetry, and the Moose is the one that's just the most beautiful poem I've almost ever read. Have you ever read that?
No,
How did we get on this? I guess we jumped the gun.
that's okay.
We're talking about our heroes.
Here's another Miss America question.
Yeah.
Do either of you have a secret ambition? Something you've always wanted to do, you never fulfilled? Maybe you will someday.
If I could go back to school now with majoring history and English lit,
Really?
teach English lit.
Really?
Yeah. But
Yeah, what-
I would still like to teach children, but I can't do that, so I can think I would like to do that.
In college, teaching
Yeah, I
college?
think I'd like to do that. I'd like to teach children too, so I don't know. I always have loved that,
Yeah.
but I would like to have had a chance to study more history and English lit.
I have about 10 secret ambitions. They're all the things that I should have started doing when I was 17. I want to be a marine biologist. I want to go back to teaching English lit, which I loved and was heartbroken when I had to give it up. I would like to write a great book of essays.
Oh, I'd like to write too.
I would want to join the Peace Corps.
I wouldn't
Still
mind
do
doing
that.
either.
I want to throw pots in the ceramics class.
Still do that too. These are great ambitions.
Oh yes, there's lots of things in the world.
Right now, I would like to fill my house up with children from Yugoslavia, which I can't do, but that just preys on my mind, and every day there's something in the newspaper that's even worse about those children. So I don't think I'll be able
Just
to
because when we
do.
look at this from years from now, we may not remember what's going on. What did you say a little bit? What's happening? Where in Yugoslavia?
No, I don't know. It's
Bosnia.
Bosnia.
Sarajevo?
Yeah. The children there are the brunt of this war that's going on, this revolution. And they can't get help. And the news is just terrible. They've found concentration camps where they've slaughtered children and these horrible things. And it makes me think of when the 30s, when they had concentration camps and we knew about it, but we didn't do much. And it seems like this is repetitive, that we're ignoring this great thing that's happening and we're not doing anything about it.
Well, they don't have oil there, so.
No.
There are terrible things happening in other parts of the world, not necessarily through war, but through famine, Somalia, and other parts of Africa too.
And this, I guess I think more about it because there's been such vivid descriptions in the news.
Yeah.
What was the question?
I don't remember. It doesn't matter. Why don't you, is there anything you want to add that we haven't asked you, or some special message you want to tell Kara or other people who are watching this, or anything like that, or something you left out? Some other details you want to add?
Well, you left out everything, and we left out everything.
No,
too.
this is just
the
makes me almost
beginning.
feel guilty because there's so much I left out that I could tell you. So
Well, we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, well, we will definitely
I
do
know
it
we
again.
left out a lot, but
yeah, we left out a lot too because we were trying to say things and sometimes not speaking in great depth because we were anxious or
well, we're
forgetful or
trying to cover too
much living.
Interesting
too much-
lives, and two very interesting
very
lives.
interesting lives in a very short time. But
I hope I never have a great message to deliver,
well,
but there's lots of things still to say.
yeah.
We love you, Kara. That's
Just
my
be
great
as good.
message.
Just be as good and wonderful as your mom and dad.
That's right.
Well, thank you, and thank you
And
for
thank you.
thank you for doing this, for